Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm very, very, very excited this morning. Just a lot of really, really, really stupendous things happening right now in my life, and also some things related to this podcast. And so I'm just a little bit more hyper, hopefully not too caffeinated today. And I'm going to share with you some of the reasons why I'm so pumped, so jazzed, why I'm so fired up. But before I get to those 6 or 7 reasons, there is some bad news, and I owe you all transparency. So you guys know I started my weight loss quest. I started it on the 6th of August. And for this first 6 months, I lost pounds every month. 1 month, it was only 1 pound, but the scales went south every month. Well, you guys know the 6th is my weigh-in day, and I did something a little different. I never went on the scales one time the entire month. And then I went on them, and I put on 5 pounds. I put on 5 pounds. So I'm struggling right now. Those of you who listen really attentively, you may remember I was saying I've logged my weight in to lose it every single day for 57 days, every day for 75 days, every day for 95 days. Well, have you noticed I haven't been doing that lately? As I stopped my daily, weekly logins, And those who say, 24 days, you do something, it takes 24 days to form a habit. And once you do something for 24 days, you've got a habit or you break a habit. Wrong. I think I've proven that. So I'm just out of the zone right now. I'm going to get there. I'm completely determined to get there. And I know I'll get there. It's just going to take a little bit more of a circuitous route. It may take me a little bit longer. It's all about between the ears. It's all about mentality right now. And I know the mindset I need to get in, and I'm not there yet. And I can get back in it, but I'm targeting April 1st for a relaunch just because right now my family's in town. We're doing nice restaurants. Then I'm going to be in North Carolina for a week at a conference, and I'm just not ready to get into the zone yet. But as soon as I get back from there, I'm going to get back into the zone. If any of you have experienced waning motivation in your quest to lose weight and you have any tips for me, I do welcome them, because I got to get back on this journey. I just took a little bit of a hiatus. All right, let me get to all the reasons why I'm so fired up and why I'm so excited, though. Last Sunday, Gil Villanueva did a Q&A with our listeners. We had more than 40 families sign up from over 20 states, and the feedback from everyone I heard was they were really glad they attended. It was well worth their 60 minutes. In fact, the only constructive criticism I've received so far is 9:30 is late start for East Coast people. So can we change that? And the good news is we are changing that. No more 9:30 East Coast times. So we have our next one coming up. That'll be Thursday, April 3rd. That'll be 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, and 5:30 Pacific. And it's with Andy Stickler. And Andy's just so transparent, and he keeps it so real. He does not get politically correct. You ask a question, you get a really direct answer. He says things a lot of other people don't say. I feel really good about this. I hope you'll sign up. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com, hit the events tab, and you'll see Q&A with Andy Stickler on April 3rd. We hope to see you there. Signups are going really, really well so far. but we have a few more weeks, so please sign up. I also got some real positive news from a couple of podcast listeners this week that sort of inspired me. One was just an email, and it just came in and it said, hey, YCBK team, I want you to know I love the podcast, never miss an episode. I kind of woke up this morning, kind of had that math feeling, a little bit in the doldrums. And then I remembered it's Thursday, a whole new episode drop that I can look forward to. And it completely changed my mood. And, it might just be little, but things like that inspire us. Another positive came from a session I did with a podcast listener in California. And she said, the single biggest thing I've learned from the podcast, I've learned to respect the competition. And that meant the world to me because a lot of times I just feel like I fail as a communicator trying to get people to realize how big that world is out there, how many strong applicants are out there, especially if you're aspiring to like the 1% and 2% of the most selective schools in the country. And how I can get people out of their own school environment to see the bigger, broader competition so they won't have unrealistic expectations has been an incredible challenge. And then you don't want to go all the way to the other extreme where people feel completely demotivated and dissuaded from applying because they're like, what's the use? Nobody gets in. So just kind of strike that balance as a communicator. That was like beyond challenging. But normally I find the error is more to the first extreme where people don't realize that literally you could fill a stadium up, 86,000 person stadium up just with kids number 1 and number 2 in their class just in this country. And most of those kids apply to the same sort of cadre of schools, let alone international and everything else. So when someone respects the competition and says that they've embraced that, I just love it. It's not an entitlement mentality. I think it's healthy. It's knowledgeable. And I don't know, it just was really refreshing to me and made me feel like maybe we are getting through and communicating the realities of new modern day college admissions. Another thing that really encouraged me this week, so many of you reached out and said you've signed up for Scholar Match. Now, Scholar Match, as you've heard, if you've been listening to our Thursday episodes, is a fantastic organization that provides college counseling for gifted and talented under-resourced students, hundreds of them across the country, by matching them with a college counselor who they train and purely on a volunteer basis. Families take on 1 to 3 students, and most of their counselors stick with them for years because they find it really fulfilling. And they've identified our podcast as a place where they could identify more counselors, because if you're crazy enough to listen to 3 hours, you're pretty deep into the weeds in this stuff, and it shows you have a love for this stuff. And so they reached out, and Hannah and Nora came on to other college counselors to talk about their program and just answer any questions you might have, and to say, hey, we need more counselors. The more counselors, we can help more students. So we've been getting so many listeners reach out and say, hey, Mark, I signed up. And, it prompted me to reach out to the leadership at Scholar Match and said, I'm getting a lot of people that are telling me they're signing up to be a counselor with you guys. I know you're tracking it. Are you seeing the same thing I'm seeing? And I was so heartened. So the response that I got was, your college-bound kid listeners are the number one source of new college counselors signing up for our program. And it just meant the world to me, because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's all about us helping each other and helping a deserving student get the opportunity that they really deserve. And I'm just thankful to you guys for signing up. I know I've signed up. I'll be at the March 14th session, which is 4 to 5 Pacific time, and it is 5 to 6 Mountain time, and 6 to 7 Central time, and 7 to 8 Eastern time. And for those of you who can't make it, they still have another session, which is March 26th, and that's a morning session. That's 10 a.m. Pacific time, and that's 11 a.m. Mountain time, 12 p.m. Central time, and 1 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll have the information in the show notes. We'll also have the volunteer contact form. I'm going to keep talking about these all the way up into that March 26th session. Just a cause that as a podcast we want to get behind and support. All right, another reason I'm fired up, 12 days away from our first gathering. That's right, 4 of our co-hosts are attending the SACAC conference in Raleigh, and that's Susan, Linda, Lisa, and myself. And we're coming to meet you. In fact, Susan wasn't planning on coming to SACAC, so she changed her plans to come all the way from Philadelphia just because she's excited to meet you guys. So we'll have some mingling and interaction. We'll have light refreshments. My oldest daughter is an acclaimed baker. You may remember me talking about her competing on the Bake Off British baking contest that she was on over in Europe and England. So she'll be making some food for us, and we'll have some podcast trivia and some college admissions trivia. Just have fun. All the details are on our website. That's the evening of Saturday, March 23rd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time at Kelby Farms Apartment Clubhouse in Durham. Once again, just go to yourcollegemykid.com, hit the events tab, and sign up. We'd love to meet you, and we hope you'll join us if you either live close enough to drive, or if you happen to be doing college visits in the area. Quite a few people that signed up say, hey, I'm doing college visits in the area. So this works out perfectly. So maybe if you're looking at doing college visits in that area, you can add us to your agenda. Finally, my mom and my sister are here. We're just having such a blast. And then Kirsten Joy flew in and surprised them last night. And it's just so great to be with them. You know, a lot of times we meet at resorts all around the country. In fact, my sister Kathleen's brother, Chris, said, you know, we've gone to 11 resorts with you all around the country, but it's been so long since they've actually come here at our house. Nothing like having people at your own home. And, you know, family is family, and family is precious, and I'm having a blast. And there's one more personal thing I want to share that I think will inspire you, but I can't quite share it yet. So I'm sort of under secrecy for hopefully one more week, and then I can share it with you maybe next week or the week after. I think you'll be inspired by it. And last reason I'm fired up is I just think you're going to like this episode. I get most excited when we have new content we've never shared before, and we're going to talk about some new content. So there is tremendous growth right now in states providing guaranteed admission by class rank. In fact, 4 states in the last 7 months have adopted these plans. And so we're going to be talking about it. Is this good? Is it bad? I'm going to look at 6 things that detractors from these plans hate and 6 reasons that proponents of these plans love. And then we'll close out with Andy Stickler from Connecticut College. I think he does just a great job of helping us understand Connecticut College in part 2 of 3 of that spotlight. All right, let's dive right in. So Texas was the first to pioneer these guaranteed admissions plans by class rank. It happened back in 1997. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. But this summer is when you really saw tremendous momentum in these plans. And it first started in August, and we talked about this. South Carolina adopted a plan, and the plan also involves guaranteed admission to one of their 3 comprehensive universities, sometimes called satellite universities, that are part of the USC system. And I'm referring to USC Aiken, USC Beaufort, and USC Upstart. And they also have some provisions if you're coming from an independent school too, where you can be in the top 20%, not in the top 10%. So they're trying to sort of be as comprehensive as they can. So that was the first one, and we talked about that on the podcast. That was pretty noteworthy, the reasons why they did it. That decision broke right after the affirmative action decision, but in South Carolina, and it's a very conservative state, they made it very clear it had nothing to do with affirmative action. What we didn't talk about was Tennessee. So Tennessee adopted a 10% plan 1 month later in September. And I'm going to have a few quotes from you about that plan later on in this episode. But in the last couple months, it feels like the dam is breaking. So Wisconsin adopted a top 5% plan that passed the legislature. And then mid-January, in her address, Governor Hochul announced a proposal for a top 10% plan that's modeled after Texas. So that's just in the last 4 months. Tennessee, South Carolina, Wisconsin, all law. And by the way, those plans go into effect right away. And New York, the proposal is out there. and gaining momentum. So let's talk about 6 reasons opponents don't like these plans, and then 6 reasons why proponents really like this plan. And you guys know I'm very prone to sometimes editorializing, giving my opinion, letting you know my perspective on things. And I will most likely do that. In fact, I know myself, I'll probably almost assuredly do that at some point. But I'm not going to do that in this episode. I'm just going to share the reasons and let you sort of think through the different sides of the argument and come to your own conclusions, or at least develop maybe an initial perspective, and hopefully you'll do more research and develop your own convictions. You know, I remember when I was in grad school and I was taking this class, and I have a graduate degree in theological studies from Dallas Theological Seminary. Class was on marriage and the family. And I remembered Dr. Stanley Toussaint saying, you know what's crazy? When I do marriage counseling, I'll talk to one spouse and I'll hear their side and I'll think, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And then I'll listen to the other spouse and I'll think this is terrible. 2 completely different perspectives. And the point he was making is you have to be very, very careful when you're only hearing one side of an argument to think you understand an issue. And that's always stuck with me. And so I always like to hear the best arguments for and against anything. This is one reason why I like colleges that have a wide range of diversity, not just of things like socioeconomics and race and ethnicity and gender and religion and those kinds of things, but also diversity of thought and diversity of perspective. That was important to me for both of my kids in their college search, that they're going to be able to hear the strongest arguments from both sides, because I just think it develops your critical thinking better. So I'm going to share with you the arguments against these plans, and I think you're going to find that they're pretty cogent. They're pretty persuasive. But I think you're probably going to feel the same thing when you hear the arguments from the other side. All right, so here are, in my opinion, the strongest arguments against these top percentage plans. And just so you know, basically they go by class rank, right? And if you get them, you're in. All right. Probably the strongest argument you hear is that it punishes kids who are in very good high schools, where it's a lot harder to get into the top 5 or the top 10%. I mean, people spent a lot of time researching the best school districts. And oftentimes that's why they moved where they moved. And the argument goes like this, like, is it really fair to punish my kid because they happen to be surrounded by a whole bunch of really high achievers? And now we're kind of cannibalizing each other, and you're getting knocked out because we happen to be in a school district that has an inordinate number of very high achieving kids. And this is more of a fairness argument. And by the way, you're going to get one heck of a fight trying to push these programs and plans through, because there's very powerful people that are parents in the top performing school districts in every state. And they may be big donors that play a role in who gets elected. So this is one of the reasons, and in my opinion, this is the strongest reason why I hear the most emotion on this topic, because most people are going to look at it from the perspective of, is this going to help my kid or not help my kid, period. That's all I care about. Is it going to help my kid or not help my kid? And if you're in a pretty good school district, then it is true that it's going to be harder to get into the top 5% of a good school, of a high performing school district versus a not as high performing school district. So this is the fairness argument. And it's one of the ones that I feel drives so much of the emotion against the program, but it's not the only one. Second argument against these programs are that they're detrimental to school culture. And I think this is also a pretty powerful argument. It pits one student against each other, and it encourages a more competitive rather than a collaborative environment. This is the reason why schools have moved away from rank. There was a time that the overwhelming majority of schools had class rank. And I saw a presentation from Tufts University back in 2019 that said only 26% of their students are applying with a class rank these days, because schools felt like, okay, this is detrimental to school culture, creating a competitive, not collaborative environment. And if you manage a school, the environment of the school, the culture of the school is going to be extremely important to you. And think about it, it's somewhat almost inevitable, right? Like if I know that if I'm in a certain top percentage of my class, I get in, and if I'm not, then my chances of getting in go down precipitously. Then it's kind of hard for me not to look at students around and wonder, is this person coming for my spot to take my lunch? Of course, it was never your spot and it's never your lunch, but that's going to be the mindset that's going to be prevalent when you're trying to achieve something. So that's I think of one of the strongest arguments against these guaranteed spots based on your class rank. Another argument is that it encourages more box checking versus pursuing your passions. In other words, the way this works is most schools are not going to use an unweighted GPA. They're going to use some type of weighted GPA, right? Because if they're going to create up a ranking system, it's not fair to punish kids that take harder classes over kids that take easier classes. So in most systems, not all, but most, there's going to be some type of weighting. And now instead of kids pursuing their passions, they're just going to be doing more box checking. Of course, others would say, well, they were already doing that anyway because the word is out that colleges like rigor. So some people were already just taking more APs, hoping that it would increase their chances of getting in. But the idea being this sort of takes it to a whole new level, and now it's on steroids. All right, the fourth reason, and there's a lot of emotion around this one as well, is that this feels like a covert attempt to introduce race back into college admissions. Why is it that these plans all of a sudden are popping up right after the Supreme Court's ruling this summer? And there's some reason to believe there's a correlation. So let's take a look at the history of the Texas law. So the Texas legislation became the first in the nation to pass this percentage-based plan. It was 10% at the time in 1997, and it's morphed and evolved over the years because now this is year 27 of them having the plan. In 2019, it became a 6% plan as the state continued to grow, and faster than the size of UT Austin grew. They had to change and modify the plan. But Bush was governor of Texas at the time, and he explicitly came out and said it. So in Texas, the plan, House Bill 588, was signed into law by then Governor George W. Bush, and it guaranteed top 10%, seniors automatically admitted. But what did he say? Well, let's take a look at what was going on at the time. The state had just invalidated the use of affirmative action in its public colleges and universities in 1996. This was the Fifth Circuit, and they had there was a case called Hopwood versus Texas, and it banned the use of race in college admissions. And the Supreme Court failed to take up the case, making the Fifth Circuit the law for the state of Texas. And George Bush is on record as saying that we don't support race-based admission, but if you can do extremely well in whatever context you're in, then it still is an opportunity to diversify schools. And even someone as conservative as Samuel Alito praised the Texas plan as an attempt at racial diversity without having race-based quotas. So there's definitely a correlation between these plans and race-based in a way of trying to increase racial diversity in colleges. And that's why, the Students for Fair Housing, the people that came out and opposed all of the plans, all of the race-based initiatives that you've seen, they have been very much against these plans, very much against them, and been very outspoken against them as a covert end-round way of trying to get race-based affirmative action, saying, okay, you can go into predominantly Black or Latino under-resourced school, and if you perform in the top there, that does not make you equal to somebody doing well in a high-performing suburban school district. That's been the mentality. By the way, I should also mention Florida adopted a plan largely in response to the court's rulings. And then California, now this is I'm going back a long time here. It's giving you some history. California's eligibility in local context, ELC, where they look at students who are in the top 9% of their school as one of their factors for admission, they've been very explicit about that. It's a way of taking school context into consideration. But these plans, they really had a lot of their genesis as anti-affirmative action legislation past Texas, California, and Florida. So it would be correct to say the history is rooted in an attempt to get some more racial diversity without explicitly, giving people some type of bonus system or points for their race in the process. So that would be fair. Once again, depending on what your view is on affirmative action or race-based affirmative action, that might partly color what you think about this point. All right, the next point is that it can punish more creative schools that have unique missions and evaluate in other ways, some artistic-based schools and things like that. Now you're forcing them to move into a rank-based evaluation system that they're uncomfortable with and they don't believe is in the best interest of their students. Some of the blowback against that argument has been that while these plans that we have, these ranking systems we're using to do auto admission, we stand by them. We don't give every one of our spots away for those plans. We still keep spots open for other students to demonstrate their excellence other than strictly through their class ranking. So that's sort of the pros and cons in that argument. All right, another argument by the proponents is that there's more ambiguity and uncertainty, not less. And this argument is that states grant tremendous flexibility to the districts and how they choose to calculate their grade point averages and class rank. So while it might seem like it's simplifying the process, it's actually complicating the process because you have to learn every system's arcane rules as to how they go about, implementing their own ranking system. And then there's others who actually argue that it doesn't increase racial diversity. So you're doing all this and it doesn't work. And there's some original research actually that came out. It's been substantiated by some other studies. When you look at TAMU, which is just Texas A&M University TAMU, and UTA, University of Texas Austin, they did not experience more racial diversity when they went to the 10% plans. But now there's been 27 years to study this stuff. And what some of the evidence shows is that students from some of those underrepresented schools that weren't even applying are applying in much greater numbers. They're not necessarily getting more Black and brown kids, but they are tapping into some schools that weren't sending anybody and getting more school by diversity. So there's some evidence along that. So some people attack it saying it's not an effective way at getting more race-based affirmative action. All right, so let's talk about the other side, because I think anyone who's being honest, even if you like these plans, I think you'd have to admit that some of the reasons in there are pretty persuasive. Some might even argue compelling. However, it's also true for the opposite side. So let's talk about the 6 main reasons why people like these plans. So just like the opponents argue it's not fair to take a student that's in a high-performing district and only take the top 5% or 10% or 20%, whatever the different plans are. They're all percentage-based guaranteed admits. It's also not fair for us to have a system that primarily funds individual schools by the property taxes. In other words, the wealth of the parents leads to better schools, and you're giving an advantage to people of means. And that's not fair, especially for public schools that collect income from every citizen. So they argue the fairness argument completely differently from the other side. And they not only argue the property taxes argument, but they also say that not all talent resides in certain zip codes. And sure, the high performing schools always, pretty much always, with very, very, very few exceptions, are going to be full of more affluence, more wealth in the parent body, and more highly educated parents. And the argument is that if you have a highly educated parent, you've got not just a good tutor, you've got an unbelievable tutor built in, living in your house for 18 years to give you 18 years of enrichment compared to someone that doesn't have that. And we just don't believe that all the talent exists and resides in one part of the state or one part of these schools. And so that's a fairness argument from the other direction. So right now, and just so you know, if maybe I'm not making this clear, so let me say something. When you look at almost every single state in this country, public school, an inordinate number of the highest achieving students are coming from the pockets of wealth and the pockets of high education, which is pretty much cities and suburbs, as opposed to rural communities or exurbs or inner city communities. It's just a fact. If you're in Georgia, it's Metro Atlanta. That's where you're seeing your super high achieving kids coming out of. If you're in North Carolina, then it's going to be, the Wake School District, or Charlotte Mecklenburg, so the Raleigh, Durham area or Charlotte. If you're in Virginia, it's going to be Northern Virginia, right? Those are just three examples. If you're in Wisconsin, it's going to be in Madison, and parts of suburban Milwaukee. Like, that's where you're going to see your most gifted and talented kids coming out of those school districts. And it's highly correlated by wealth. And you could just look at every school district and look at the average income of that school district or the average education level of that school district. And that's where you're going to see the highest achievers. So that's what this is coming from. And it's not, I've given you some Midwest examples, some East Coast examples. That also applies to Seattle, and it applies to, places like the Bay Area in California and greater LA and San Diego and many other, Orange County and many other places, pockets of wealth. It's the same thing in every single state. This transcends geography. It's true south, east, west, north. Texas, you're going to see it in Dallas and Houston and Austin and places like that, more so than in the hinterlands. All right, so I just want to make sure. It's like that evidence is so clear. By the way, Georgia addresses this in a different way. The valedictorian and salutatorians automatically get into UGA and Georgia Tech. So they do it too, but they just do it for number 1 and number 2 in your class. All right. Second argument for it is what I would call the diversity argument. So it's going to help improve the college if we have all different perspectives represented on our campus. It's going to improve the quality of the education. It's going to remove people from being in an echo chamber. It's going to allow them to hear different voices. It's going to challenge their critical thinking. It's going to make the school more interesting. It's going to prepare people for more people who they're going to meet in society as they go out into the real world, if they can get out of an echo chamber and be exposed to a wide range of different people. So it helps improve the quality of the education. And this is something that faculty want. They want those diverse perspectives. You may remember I did a podcast once on how the University of Amherst, on how Amherst College had received a grant to take students from like past military backgrounds and come in. And so these are older students that had these different experiences. And then the grant expired and they were about to phase the program up. And there was so much backlash, and it came from the faculty. It said, do you realize the perspective these kids are bringing? Nobody's bringing these perspectives. Nobody's bringing up these arguments. And we talk about topics in class. We can't lose these kids, or we're going to impede the quality of our education. So they found a way to come up with the funding without relying on grants and continue the programs. That's kind of the diversity strengthens the quality of everybody's educational experience argument. And so that's one of the strong arguments you'll hear out there. And I know it's probably hard for many people to grasp if you were raised how I was. Both my parents were educators. So I never for 1 second, I can't remember 1 second of my entire life even having the thought pop in my mind, maybe I want to go to college. Not 1 second. I didn't say 1 minute, not 1 second. It was just a given that I would go to college. It was just a given that I would graduate. I never remember for 1 second having the thought pop in my mind, boom, snap, what if I don't graduate? So there's just certain assumptions that middle-class families come with. But if you're not coming from those backgrounds, college is completely foreign. It's intimidating. You don't feel like they want you there. So it doesn't feel welcoming. You don't feel necessarily like you can maybe relate to. Those are not necessarily my type of people. So when you remove a barrier and you send a message that says, oh, no, you're automatically in, you can unlock a whole different mindset that can lead to more people applying. And the evidence shows that more people do apply from schools where they never used to get that many applications with these percentage plans. So it's basically the first argument, fairness argument, second argument, the diversity argument. The third argument is that colleges are supposed to be engines of social mobility. It helps society. In fact, if you look at Governor Hochul's quote in her recent address, here's what she says: access to higher education has the potential to transform the lives of young New Yorkers. Hochul said during her annual State of the State address, Tuesday, January 9th. Through these bold initiatives, we are taking critical steps toward ensuring every New York student can continue their education, build their professional career, pursue their dreams. All right, so that's that engine of social mobility, help society argument. The fourth argument, and this is one that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but I think it's a really, really powerful argument, and it's one of the reasons why these programs have a lot of mobility. And I'm going to read some quotes to you from Tennessee, because we never really covered them when they made their decision in September to go to a mandatory admission plan. So here's this argument. It helps increase enrollment, and it helps with the demographic cliff and the effects of COVID. We need a solution to address the enrollment declines. So this was a big part of the explanation of the policy when Tennessee agreed to admit 10% through guaranteed admission to the University of Tennessee system. And here's some things that came out of their announcement. The system will guarantee spots for high school students with a GPA of 4.0, and all system campuses, except for the flagship, UTK, or University of Tennessee, Knoxville, will accept students who earn an ACT score of 23 with a 3.2. So they went to a little more creative plan, but it's still guaranteed admissions. They not only had a top 10%, they said if you have a 23 ACT and a 3.2 GPA, you'll be admitted into the other University of Tennessee comprehensive schools other than the flagship. And here's a quote from the announcement. Higher education leaders have long braced for an expected drop-off in high school graduates starting around 2025 due to declining birth rates during the Great Recession. We have, as everyone knows, a shrinking pool of high school graduates, Randy Boyd, University of Tennessee System's president, said. Because of that, we need to be more proactive. We need to be more aggressive at attracting that shrinking pool. College-going rates are also lower than they once were in Tennessee, a problem mirrored across much of the nation since the corona pandemic began. Around 54% of Tennessee's high school class of 2022 immediately entered college after earning their diploma, according to a June report from the state's Higher Education Commission. That marked a small improvement from the prior year's cohort, but the college growing rate was still 10 percentage points lower than the class of 2015, where roughly 64% enrolled in college after high school. Officials hadn't expected the college going rate to decline, John Compton, chair of the System of Governance Board, said. That's created two headwinds: fewer high school graduates and less of them opting for higher ed, Compton said. All right, so that's another one of the reasons why this program is taking off, is it's a way of countering the demographic cliff, which we've talked at length about. Less kids have been born. If you don't know, we're talking about the demographic cliff. After the Great Recession in 07-09, people decided to have less kids. Part of a way of coping with financial challenges, right? Less kids means less kids going to college when they become 17 and 18. And that puts incredible strain on colleges who rely on a lot of high school graduates. And then with Corona, less people going to college, that's the double whammy. less high school seniors, period, and less of them going to college. So it's a way of encouraging applications. Because if you can remove the barrier of, I don't even know if I'll get in, and instead send a message, oh, you're going to get accepted, then you're going to increase your application numbers. So that's that reason. A fifth argument for proponents of this plan is they don't like the opaqueness of holistic admissions. They find it very frustrating, very stressful. This is something I hear from my families a lot. I just don't like the fact that I don't know what criteria is being used to admit my kid. It's very, very frustrating to me. Had a conversation in depth with the Long Island family about this year. I had an in-depth conversation last year with the mom from New Jersey. In fact, one of her kids chose to go to Oxford, and one chose to stay here. And the mom was telling me, I just like that system so much better. To me, I knew how my kid was being evaluated. Over here, you have no idea how they're evaluating you. So that's another argument. And then another argument is that it's more in touch with the way people are starting to think. So this whole direct admission thing is really, really picking up steam. You may remember, if you're a regular listener, after I attended the NACAC College Fair in Houston in 2022, Angel Perez, the president of NACAC, said he could see direct admissions as the number one way students are admitted within a decade. And I was shocked that he said that. I see the momentum. I remember on this podcast saying maybe in 20 years, but I don't think 10. I'm starting to think he might be right, because there's just tremendous momentum for this. Now, remember, direct admission is more than just a ranking-based plan, but it is guaranteed admission, knowing, where you can know for sure that you're going to get in, and different schools can use different criteria to determine how they're going to do that. And I don't want to get into talking about that here because we've done multiple episodes on that. And Lisa's got something coming up with American University to talk even more about direct admission plans as well. So you'll be hearing more about that in an interview. But the idea is, why go through all these hoops to make everything so complex? So here's a quote from Kristen Monty, a counselor at Case High School. She says, the new law will give high-achieving students a reprieve from worrying about getting into Madison. Right now, it feels sort of random for them because UW-Madison uses a holistic approach to admissions, meaning they can look at everything, Monty said. We've had high-achieving students that have not gotten into Madison, and then we've had solid students get in over them. And it's just really, really hard to explain that. So that's kind of the argument of the simplicity of it can be seen as more appealing for some people than the opaqueness of holistic admissions. All right, so that's just an overview of the pros and cons of these percentage-based plans, but they're growing. And one thing I love to do is come and talk to you guys about trends when we see new trends. This is a trend that's picking up a lot of steam. No matter what side you come down on the equation, or if you're ready to go in and do some research on your own, hopefully you feel a little bit more aware of sort of the arguments, going on. All right, we'll now transition to my conversation with Andy Stickler, as we'll do part 2 of 3, Connecticut College.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, if you never heard last week's podcast, you're going to want to go back and hear part 1. But in part 2, Andy talks about how Connecticut College has a faculty mentorship program and how it works. And he also talks about the 2 different ways Connecticut College to study abroad. And he talks about how the programs that students attend that they most frequently cite, this is one of the reasons why I came to College, to study this program at this school. And he shares the rubric he uses when reading and rating a file. And he describes the kind of application that they want to see more of at Connecticut College. And he also shares the kind of student that maybe isn't the best match. And he talks about how admission officers can discern if a student has a real love for learning. And finally, Andy talks about how should a student decide whether to submit their test scores. I know everybody's going to want to listen to that. Listen and enjoy. Is there a faculty mentorship that's a component of the study abroad? I mean, of the the capstone project, the senior project? Talk about that. What does that look like?
Yeah, so every student has obviously a faculty advisor in their major. But when they opt into an interdisciplinary center or one of our integrative pathways, there are faculty advisors and faculty coordinators who run those pathways and centers who teach the introductory integrative courses at the very beginning and serve as advisors as they navigate the pathway and help refine the question and help drive sort of that capstone project.
That's great. Now, I know one of the things you're known for is just a robust study abroad program. How is your study abroad different than a lot of others? What makes it special?
I know 5 or 6 institutions. Does this make us different? I don't know. But study abroad here at Con involves 2 different ways in which we do it. The first is kind of your typical exchange program where a student's an exchange student at a university where we have an agreement, credits all transfer back, etc. The second way we do study abroad is called Study Away, Teach Away, which is Connecticut College faculty leading Connecticut College students to a particular geographic site, and then we control the entire experience for the whole semester. Some of our popular SADA programs, we have a Study Away, Teach Away program in Vietnam. I believe we have one in Ireland. I think we have one in Perugia, which is central Italy. But then it's Connecticut College faculty, Connecticut College students leveraging the geographic region for an entire semester, which is really quite powerful.
You know, I used to ask people like you, what are your strongest programs? But everybody used to say, I don't want to get in trouble with the faculty who I don't list. So now I'm going to phrase it a little differently.
Yes.
When you have a student that says, one of the main reasons I came to Con College was because of blank program, what are the programs that you would anticipate hearing the most frequently?
Oh, that's a great question. Environmental studies, dance, computer science. Our theater program is amazing. Behavioral neuroscience, film studies. And again, some of these are majors that aren't super prevalent at other small liberal arts colleges, and as a result, people are attracted to us because of it. Very strong in bio, chem, government, international relations. Whew, I'm glad I didn't forget that one. I'd be in big trouble. Yeah. Those are the ones that people are that they name and mention as places or things that they have heard of that they're definitely interested in.
That's great. That's great. Talk to us a little bit about sort of file reading. We talked about file reading, a few weeks ago, and we were talking about reading from a busy school group, but are you comfortable sort of sharing sort of your rubric as to how you rate a file when you?
Yeah, for us, it's we're breaking things down in 2 different components. There's the academic side of the house, and then what we would call PQs, or personal qualities or personal characteristics.
Yeah.
Academically, it's largely a byproduct of curricular choice and performance. And then if a student chooses to submit the SAT or ACT, that is also factored in as well. And that's why we read by school group, because understanding the options that a student has when it comes to curriculum and what they have chosen and opted to take is a critical part of our assessment. And then performance. And then on the PQ side, wow. There are a million different things that we could be looking for. There are a million different things that could pop, whether it's theater, music, dance, student engagement, community services, unique life experiences, athletics. Who knows? Could be a million different things that resonate with a reader and therefore resonate with a committee. But I think it's safe to say that if we're doing something here, we want to do it well. And therefore, if we can identify a student who's going to contribute and help elevate what we do, we are certainly going to be interested.
If a listener hasn't heard of Con College and knows very little about it, describe the type of academic student that would be an application that we want to see.
Certainly someone who's challenged themselves. A student who's intrigued by ideas and doesn't want to be constrained by typical structures. That's where that integrative curriculum animating question piece comes in. Someone who wants a prescribed education, maybe not. And the other piece is values. Values are really important to us as an honor code school. If we get a sniff of this is not someone who actively contributes to the learning experience of others, that's a little bit of a red flag for us, without a doubt.
That first piece that you mentioned, sort of outside the box thinking, love of learning, how do you discern that in an application?
That's a really good question, because most high school curriculums are fairly prescribed.
Mm-hmm. So
I would say senior course selection can influence that, what a student chooses to take. Sometimes they'll choose to take advantage of the Common App prompt on the essay to give us some intel and information on that. At times, an interview can influence that as well. And then teacher recommendations and counselor recommendations can also inform that in some pretty interesting and fun ways. It's not a yes or no question that they're going to check off on a box, though. Like,
sure.
Are you intellectually curious and do you want to run your own education? Yes or no?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Would you describe your interviews as evaluative?
Evaluative and informative, I would say.
Flesh that out. Explain that to our listeners.
Well, we want the student to have a sense as to who we are here at Con by the time they finish the interview. But at the same time, we want to get to know the student during the course of that. And can that be evaluative in terms of intellectual curiosity and values and some of the PQs that we would find valuable here at Con? Absolutely. There's a student in particular I'm thinking about who presented a very challenging academic profile for us. He was put in front of me by one of our coaches, and I was very clear with the coach and said, I don't think we can do this. And the coach said, would you be willing to do an interview? And I said, okay. So the independent school where the student was, and this is a very socioeconomically challenged student, they brought him down here. We sat down in this chair in my office right here. He and I had a 45-minute conversation. And I said, the size of this kid's heart is amazing. He will do whatever it needs to be done to survive here. So we took a risk. I admitted him. He graduated with a 3.3. He's working for an environmental consulting firm in Denver, Colorado. He's based out of New York City. I'm good friends with his boss, and his boss says he's just absolutely killing it.
That's why you're doing what you're doing. Isn't that the joy of the job?
Yeah. And the funny thing is actually he was texting with me last night, busting my chops about the Philadelphia Eagles losing in the playoffs.
I want to go back to the standardized testing because I just so appreciate your genuineness and your transparency. Yep. So I think at one point, you still may have it, I'm not sure, but there was, correct me if I'm wrong, it might have said something on your website like if you don't have a 1390 or something like that, you may not want to submit your scores. Am I right about that? I think I vaguely remember something like that.
That might be there. I'm not positive. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at our website of late.
I thought I recalled that.
I know we post our middle 50%. Yes.
Yeah. So it's always a difficult question for people trying to figure out whether to submit scores or not submit scores. Now, you guys are doing something others aren't, which is send them to me. I'll give you an honest consult. But not everybody's doing that. So what's your advice to somebody? Because there's some schools that say, are you at the median? Others that say, are you in the middle of the 50th percent? Then, of course, we have context. You're working with a family and neither parent went to high school and they're on some Indian reservation in New Mexico. Yeah. That guy has to be factored in. So how should somebody think about this question? Because this is obviously one of the hardest questions I get. And, you don't always have time to give people a 10-minute answer.
Yeah. First, I think it's always okay to ask. Mm-hmm. I think it's okay to ask an institution, I don't know if I should or not. Can you give me any advice?
Sure.
I don't think we should start with the default position that, I can't ask.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And then the second is emotionally, psychologically, do you feel like your test score is an appropriate representation of who you are as a student? I think that's eventually where you get to.
Now, can I tell you something? That feels like a very unsatisfactory answer to somebody.
Totally.
Because I'm trying to find out if this is a good or a bad score for your school. This, if you feel like it represents your intelligence stuff, you just gave me nothing.
I know. I mean, without getting into the data itself, where you have to look at your transcript, how many A's do you have, how many A minuses, what's your unweighted GPA, how does that measure up to their average unweighted GPA, which you can find on their common data set if they choose to post it.
Sure.
You can math it out if you want and figure out where's my GPA land in terms of a 0% to 100% in terms of the percentile. And if that's higher than where you think your test score would fall, then don't submit your test scores. But if your test scores are in that upper 25% range and your GPA looks to be in the middle 50% or that 50% range, then yeah, I would submit it. I'm an analytical guy. That's how I approach this. And that's what I tell students. I'm like, listen, if you send me your stuff, I will literally plug it into our system and quantify it out and tell you what you should do based on the math. And that's the only way I could approach it.
Sure. But when you plug it into your system and you look at the math, some people are looking at landscape. They're looking at the, College Board landscape product, right? And they're looking at the school context that you come from.
Absolutely.
Some people are saying both your parents are doctors. You're very educated. You know, that's a factor here because we know the correlation between income and education and test scores.
Yep.
And then some people are kind of just looking at their numbers, and so how do you handle that with your system where you plug it in?
I'm looking at it purely internally in terms of this is the data point I get from your grades. This is the data point I get from your curriculum. This is the data point I get from your test scores. If these two data points are better than this data point, go test optional. If this data point, the test score is higher than the other two data points, submit your test scores. So for me, it's purely a quantifiable analysis based on internal rubrics.
All right. So you're not looking at it through the prism of the demographics of the family.
Nope.
You're just looking at it. You're looking at
correct.
Do your test scores enhance your profile, or do they detract from it?
Yeah, I don't want to get into a subjective assessment about expectation. What would I expect from a student from background X, Y, or Z? I'm looking at it purely from a quantifiable internal perspective regarding our rubric. Does the test score help or does the test score hurt? That's how I'm doing it.
It's just a lot of different ways to do this because there's some who would look at it through the prism of class and advantage, and they wouldn't say it's about me getting into an expectation. It's me taking the privileges that you've been afforded into context, so it's part of a contextual read, right?
Yep.
Like there's, and do you feel, it sounds like you just feel like that's maybe just too hard to do, or I don't know, I'm just trying to hear why you wouldn't look at that and factor that in.
That's a good question. And after 9 years of reading, thousands of applications a year, our internal assessment tool on the academic side, which is formulaic,
Sure,
which allows us to normalize the myriad of different academic profiles and different academic backgrounds we get. That's the perspective that I have brought to the conversation about whether you submit or whether you should waive your test score.
and
It's just based on our internal rubric, I guess.
Sure.
I appreciate your thought because that's an interesting and different way to think about it.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of the 3-part interview with Andy Strickler on Connecticut College, but you can get more of Andy because April 3rd is less than 3 weeks away. And at 8:30 Eastern Time, 7:30 Central Time, 6:30 Mountain Time, and 5:30 Pacific Time, it's your chance to have a one-on-one with Andy for an hour. Ask any question. You see how transparent he is, knowledgeable, wise, and student-centered. Just go to yourcollegebounkid.com, click the events tab, and sign up. On Thursday's episode, recently Bowdoin's director of admission made some very transparent comments about the gender gap in an article in their school newspaper. How more girls are going to college and less boys are going to college and how it impacts admissions. Jill and I will be discussing it over the next 2 weeks. We'll have a question for a listener from you. Just haven't selected it yet, so tune in Thursday to find out which one. And for you College Spotlight fans, I got a double spotlight. Both versions of our College Spotlight. Sometimes we have a thought leader come on and discuss their school, and you'll be getting that. As Julia and I will interview Lydia Dogene, who did admissions at both Haverford and Swarthmore. We'll be talking about those two fine institutions, Haverford and Swarthmore. And of course, Julia did admissions at Haverford, so she'll be chiming in with her own perspective. Two elite schools just outside of Philadelphia. And then Lisa and I will give you our feedback from our visits to Marquette in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If you like the other version of College Spotlights where we don't interview thought leaders, but we just give our perspectives after we visit places. So you get 2 College Spotlights and 1 interview on Thursday's episode. And friends, I close out with a quote I've shared with you before. It's one of the top 10 quotes I put in my 692-page book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And so I like to come back to some of those quotes every now and then because they inspire me. So this one comes from Martin Walsh, the former assistant dean of admission at Stanford. And here's what he says. I mean, the most common test we had at Stanford was not how smart are they and what have they invented, but it was actually, would you want to share a dorm with this person for a year? See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.